Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. So happy to have you here in the NSE. Really excited for this conversation today. And welcome to all to the Brooklyn Rail's 888th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, a programs associate here at the Rail, and today I have the huge pleasure and honor and privilege of being your MC for a conversation featuring MC Kinniburgh, Jen Bervin, Cecilia Vicuña, and Cole Swensen. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter, and here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but they serve as a reminder of place, a reminder of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we are speaking from. And now to introduce today's guests and host, Mary Catherine, or MC Kinniburgh, is the director of Granary Books, the co-director of Granary Books, where she is an archives broker, rare book dealer, and publisher. She specializes in 20th century and contemporary poetry archives and artist books, and is the author of Wild Intelligence, The Politics of Knowledge and Post-War American Poets Libraries. She has edited works by Gregory Corso and Mary Korte with Lost and Found, the CUNY Poetics Document Initiative, and published a bibliography and oral history of Maureen Owen's telephone books and magazine. She's also the publisher of TKS Books. Jen Bervin is a visual artist and poet whose multidisciplinary practice weaves together situated poetics, research-driven works, and long-term collaborations with specialists ranging from literary scholars to material scientists. She was the subject of a survey publication called Jen Bervin, Shift, Rotate, Reflect, Selected Works, and her work has been exhibited internationally and is held in more than 60 collections. She's also published numerous books, including Silk Poems from Nightboat, and most recently, Concordance and Omission. Cecilia Vicuña is a poet, artist, activist, and filmmaker whose work addresses pressing concerns of the modern world, including ecological destruction, human rights, and cultural homogenization. Born and raised in Santiago de Chile, she has been in exile since the early 1970s. She coined the term arte precario in the mid-1960s in Chile as an independent and non-colonized category for her precarious works composed of debris, structures that disappear in the landscape, and include her quipus, which is not in Quechua. She's also the author of more than 30 books and the recipient of numerous awards, and solo exhibitions of her work have been held in many major institutions, most recently at the Museo de Bellas Artes in Santiago. And poet Cole Swensen is the author of 17 volumes of poetry and a collection of critical essays called Noise That Stays Noise. A book of hybrid poem essays called Art and Time was published by Nightboat in 2021. She is a former Guggenheim Fellow and has been a finalist for the National Book Award and awarded numerous other recognitions, including the Iowa Poetry Prize, among others. She's also translated over 20 volumes of poetry, prose, and art criticism in French, and has won an award for that from Penn USA. Thank you so much to all of you for being here, being present today. I'm so thrilled for this conversation, and I'll pass it over to you, Cole.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who helped put this together, Chloe and Eleanor and Fong Bui and everyone at the Rail, really appreciate it. The Publishing in Transit series aims to honor the many people who work behind the scenes, often with very little recognition, to bring poetry, make it come alive in this country, but all over the world. They're often really the unsung heroes. So this is the 20th Publishing in Transit event, and we're really thrilled to have it be with Granary Books and Steve Clay, though he's not with us, he's with us, and we honor him as well for that behind the scenes work. we always like to start with poetry, just to get it in the air. So we're going to hear from each of the three, two first, and then Cecilia is going to close the program. But we're starting today with MC. So I'll turn it over to you, and looking forward to hearing your work.
Thank you so much, Cole. Hello, everyone. It's so amazing to see you in your little Zoom squares. I am just so pleased to be here with you all. And I'm just going to start right with the poetry because I completely agree with Cole. It's the way to start and finish anything. So I'm going to be reading a little bit from a series I write. It's called Messy Archivist, and it's just a little chapbook about the intersections of bookmaking and archival practice. So here we go. 34 boxes later, the UPS driver asks, "How long is this going to go on?" The creasing of papers around stacks of books, like applying fondant to a layer cake, a muscle memory for my hands hours later. I squint through the body of a martini glass at the bartender who remembers, "You're the archivist." In the wild, who knows this word? The waves are firing on a nearby beach, audible from blocks away. Fogged out eyes from dust, dirt on the knees of my jeans, creviced in palms. Today is the completion of a promise that was made before the dream of my ability to fulfill it. Fuzz of acoustic strummed in Vermont's twilight. What blues songs do I know the words to? I will always know the chords. The car in the gravel lot is full of someone's archive organized by their childhood friend. A dog barks in the distance as the hills turn fully black in the dark. Yellow flowers and hand-hauled stones, generate poet holding my small white dog while I load the car full of books and papers. The most aromatic cup of coffee deep in the woods. Gentle poet in baseball cap, in repose on porch. The wonder of encountering our own past. I can offer you the reassurance that I am mostly a physician. Archival bodies are nothing personal, just a form of consciousness. It's a curious desire to stay on the surface as much as possible, but to train the breath for deeper dives that are necessary to know what I'm actually seeing. But it can be personal when that consent to witness is given. It can be an initiation if we want it to be. It is astonishing how the items adhere to themselves, to each other by the force of series, correspondence, drafts, ephemera, like gravitational pulls, planetary tracks. I pull out cracked rubber bands, careful to remove the residue that corrodes the paper. Likewise for paper clips, acidic file folders. What is designed to facilitate a bond, a physical connection between materials, is often destined to destroy the material itself. Our minds are an imperfect but powerful tool for collation. So is narrative. Over time, I am startled at the number of hands on paper and faces in photographs that I recognize, even their sofas or their bookshelves. 1,260, the pounds your books weighed in their boxes. I made a promise to you. I had to keep it. So I learned how to do it. I received the task before I had the skills. A task of visualizing, seeing what is truly there. Your library as initiation. You and your books teach. I honor the vulnerability it requires to surrender your belongings to another person's care. The vulnerability it requires to receive the belongings, absorb their lessons, to be attentive and honest. The call comes before the ability, but that's what gives the call its character. After HD, the mysteries remain. To the poet, you are fully made, always. Every time I create your image, you'll dispute it. Still, it's my work to craft you somehow, my task to find your place. Can I tell you what I discover about you, to you? Upon what qualifications would you believe me? I received the call before I was ready, but it gave me an eye for the details, a watchfulness for what might be relevant. In those glimpses, I began to see patterns. These images I get to keep in the imaginative archive that I am building. Your thumbnail's vertical scar, your love of blue, your long white hairs and folders, your exuberant signature, the sharp bright of your eye. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a great tribute to start with. I really, really appreciate that. And we're going to turn it over to Jen Bervin here, who I think is going to give us some images too.
Hi, thank you, Eleanor, Chloe, Cole for the invitation, Steve for the long invitation, Mary, Catherine for your just dazzle and the air you breathe into this beautiful endeavor, and Cecilia, Vicuña, who is such a sweetheart and a long dear friend. I have to just say a shout out to Cole, who was kind to me and corresponded with me before I did anything at all. And that kind of support is really a beautiful thing. And I hope to emulate it with other people. And I'm grateful for it from you. Thanks, Cole. I'm going to read a little bit from a new book with Granary. And since they mostly go into libraries right away, which I love, I'm going to read it for this. So this is a kind of adjusted version of the prose poems that you're looking at the end of the book. This is from Concordance Omission. The non-significant word no. A concordance indexes the words a major author has used in her work over the course of her lifetime. In the concordance to the poems of Emily Dickinson, edited by S.P. Rosenbaum, he provides an alphabetical listing of all significant words, each elaborated in its line and poem context. In the back matter, each word is listed in order of frequency. Next slide. Dickinson used the non-significant word no 395 times, yet Rosenbaum omitted it from the concordance of her work. Yes, which was included, she used 4. Which is most significant to a poet writing to, quote, further no? I typed my new concordance entries, next slide, please, for no on an IBM Wheelwriter 3 following S.P. Rosenbaum's page architecture. I consider the artist's book an oversized addenda from the word addendus, or that which must be added, to the Rosenbaum concordance, or in Dickinson's sign, plus. A sister. The first concordance of Dickinson's poems, edited by Louise Klein Kelly, was submitted as her doctoral dissertation at Penn State College in January of 1951. Dr. Klein Kelly undertook the daunting task of creating a concordance from 5 earliest inaccurate editions of Dickinson's poems during the era when these were the only ones available in print. 4 years later, in 1955, Thomas Johnson and Theodora Ward edit the New Variorum edition of Dickinson's poems. In it, Johnson acknowledges Dr. Klein Kelly's work thusly, quote, constantly useful has been Miss Louise K. Kelly's unpublished thesis. In the same stroke, Johnson's new definitive Variorum edition renders Kelly's scholarship based on prior editions of the poems wholly unpublishable. In 1964, Rosenbaum also credits Dr. Klein Kelly's concordance in his introduction. He bases his concordance on Johnson's edition, lamenting, quote, unless the maker of a concordance attempts the extraordinary task of re-editing a text in and through his concordance, his work will only be as good as the editions on which it's based. In the obituary of Franz Klein, the abstract expressionist action painter, Dr. Klein Kelly is identified merely as, quote, a sister, Mrs. Louise Kelly of State College, Pennsylvania. Next slide, please. Rosenbaum's book, next slide. Is there one? Oh, maybe the first slide. The one with the long image. The one below that one. Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Mocha. Rosenbaum's book is the third volume in the distinguished series of Cornell concordances. Like the two that came before it, it was programmed and indexed on an IBM 704 computer. Rosenbaum's concordance relied upon computer programmer James A. Painter's, quote, supervision of work mediated through an IBM 704 mainframe computer, a distant descendant of the Jacquard loom. The process involved typists punching lines of Dickinson's poems into 10,000 IBM punch cards using the binary decoded decimal interchange code, a 48-character code. Rosenbaum thanks Marta Petto and James Free for punching and verifying the text. Next slide, please. The blue card, perfect. I was able to locate Marta Petto, a Hungarian refugee from World War II, presumably Jewish, who first put her brother through medical school, then herself through college with the income she earned from her coding work. She went on to become a distinguished social worker in Denver, Colorado, and upon her retirement, the mayor named November 16th Marta Petto Day. Safety nets. Next slide, please. Or the image, let's see, you pull up the images, I can tell you which one. It's the image of, that one, thank you. Safety nets. Staged promotional IBM photos typically show a lone white man in business attire or bejeweled white women, often lone figures amid a hidden figures to room-sized mainframe computer. By 1964, the reality of IBM punch card coding is closer to the long rows of card punchers and verifiers depicted at the Social Security Administration in Baltimore. Primarily Black women who work to incrementally, numerically build the United States social safety net. It is through the Social Security Death Index that I'm able to find the irreducible 105 beloved people named James Free, who died between 1935 and 2014. Entering my father's name, Ed Bervin, it yields a single entry, 1 of 1, 1980, a year when the Social Security safety net was in place to catch our small, grieving family. Digital optimism. The information from the 10,080 space perforated IBM punch cards was transferred onto magnetic tape. In the introduction to the concordance, Rosenbaum writes at the omitted words that it is possible for a computer to retrieve them from the complete magnetic tape of the concordance. The Cornell Library reports almost immediately that both the punch cards and the magnetic tape were lost. I bought my punch cards on eBay. This summer, while visiting a prison museum in France, I learned that a paper manufacturer in NSE, the city where my wife was born, produced IBM's punch cards. In the same prison where I read this, Jewish people were interned during World War II. Spine poem for catalogers, and that's the image of all of the things together. A little bit of orange. Yeah, thank you. The copy of Rosenbaum's concordance I acquired in 2006 is a former library copy, deaccessioned, weeded from Schenectady Community College Library. I wish to embed framing devices from that book, the library binding, its Library of Congress cutter number, prefix. I had plenty of room on such a long spined box using cataloging lexicons. Strongly in need of an overhaul, I encoded a spine poem for catalogers within the call numbers. I won't read the numbers themselves, but I'll just read the subjects that they point to, if I may. American Literature, Dickinson, Emily, No, Bervin, 2023. History of American Literature, Treatment of Special Subjects, Knowledge, Theory of. Treatment of Special Subjects, Patriarchy. History of American Literature by period, 19th century, Grief. Collections of American Literature, Special Topics, Prose and Verse, Art. Special Topics, Prose and Verse, Dissenters. Poetry, concordances, dictionaries, indexes, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. And again, has gotten us right into the heart of not only poetry, but Granary Books. So really, really good. Before we go into hearing history and seeing images about Granary itself, I'd love to ask each of you to talk a little bit about your own practice, because we have today 3 people who do radically different things that way overflow poetry, and lots of different performance and visual work and bookmaking and all sorts of different things. And because it's so diverse, I'd love just for that to be in the air, for we to all of us to have a chance to know what you all do. So let's start with Cecilia. If you'd like to just tell us for 4 or 5 minutes about your practice. I know it's hard to squish it into that kind of time, but.
Sorry, so I'm not supposed to do a reading?
You'll be doing the closing reading. So,
Sorry.
and
Sorry
if
for...
you could just tell us off the cuff about your projects over the years, your current ones, the range of your work, that would be splendid.
Okay, so first, I would like to honor this moment of sharing this with 4 women that, is it 4? No, I think I'm the 4th. I'm very bad with numbers. Honor the 3 of you, 3 women that I admire immensely. So when I am asked, what am I doing now? My first thought is, I'm doing the same thing I have been doing all my life, and which is feeling how on earth is it possible to embody this brutal clash that people have written about for so long between the ancient indigenous culture of the Americas, which is one side of my inheritance, and the incoming side of the invasion of the colonizers, which is my other side. So I think to understand my work or to appreciate what is it that my work is about, it is important to sense that this clash did not occur only in time and space, in history, in geography, in the territories, but continues to occur, to take place in our souls, in our bodies as mestizo people living in a completely unresolved conflict that only gets worse as the destruction of our land continues and the appropriation of all our resources, including our spirit, soul, and imagination. So if you look at that, you can see how is it that the teenager Cecilia embraced the quipu. Quipu means knot in Quechua, and for those who don't know what it is a system of condensing information, not in an alphabet or in a script as many cultures around the world, but in threads. And Cecilia learned about this reading the books of her aunt, a wonderful sculptor named Vicuña, and who had a library, one of the few magnificent libraries in Santiago, where you would find a book including a quipu. And so to tell the story of what that did to Cecilia, that's what I have been doing for more than 50 years, because each one of the quipus that I have done is telling a story. And the quipus that I'm doing now, 50 years after the case, continue to expand on the imagination that the quipu itself opened in me. And so, to speak in Andean terms, it was not that Cecilia encountered the quipu, but in a much more realistic sense, the quipu encountered Cecilia. And so the quipu is really a field of knowledge practiced by thousands of people during more than 5,000 years. And so now that I'm old and I have been given the chance to create outrageous things for the last 2-3 years especially, I am not only creating these monumental quipus that dissolve, and and are as impermanent as the tiny quipus that I have done in the past. But also I am recovering a dimension of the quipu that was never acknowledged by historians, which is that the quipu is also a collective endeavor. So now that the earth is enduring the destruction of most of its ecosystems, now that people around the world are enduring horrendous violence and we have billions of refugees and displaced people, the quipu that I imagine in the present is not just a sculpture or a poem as I have done in the past, but it is also a coming together. It is also a system where we can find the space and the time to connect each other in rituals and public events that are very large and very moving and involving ideally hundreds of people. And so in the last 2 years, I have proposed this to be called the quipu of encounters. And these encounters have already taken place in 5 cities, I believe, and they're about to continue to take place. So my hair stands on end when I tell you that this is what the quipu has taught me. I have been dealing with this form of a script as poetry and as art, and that in itself was a rebellion against the history of quipu being projected by colonizing scholars, even though they didn't know they were colonizing. Some of them were fantastic scholars, but still they saw the quipu as an object. They saw a quipu as a way of keeping track of statistics and so forth. Lately, more scholars are opening to the other dimensions of the quipu to understand that it was also used to inscribe poetry, and it was also used by, how can I say this, to be a witness of history, a witness of political events. So if you can imagine the mind of having a quipu, which is a sort of huge sculpture, and this is actually the case as it was in a community, a living community up in the mountains of Peru, that when there is an election, a communal election for representatives, the election is not complete until the quipu acts as a witness, because the memory of the quipu remains while we all go away. And so to bring back the potentiality of us as community embodying a form of memory, that to me is what the quipu wants. So that in our coming together in events such as this that you have organized, Cole, the coming together of the different forms of knowledge and experience that the 4 of us embody become a memory. Of course, we have the Zoom that's going to be later in YouTube and so forth, but there is another memory that the quipu wants people to experience, which is the memory of the feelings and the thoughts that we share, that, for example, have happened to me hearing MC or hearing Jen. I deeply connect with the work of these women whose work nurtures and sets my imagination free. And that is the memory that we wish to transmit, the freeing of the collective and individual imagination in one.
Thank you. That was just really great introduction to your work. And I'm so glad to know that there are all sorts of images online, and encourage everyone to go online and see them there. It's magnificent stuff. So let's go to MC and tell us about your practice. I know it's also extremely varied and includes publishing with hand book making elements and different writing projects, etc. So we'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Cole. And wow, Cecilia, that just, your work is so amazing because it hits on a level where the body gets to experience that memory and that connection to work. And the word that you used for the activity that Kipu fulfills, the witness, is something that if I had to describe a central theme of the things I do on the physical plane, it would be in vein of Johanna Drucker's term participating witness. And she wrote an amazing essay about Granary Books and Steve's work that kind of described it thusly. Those of us who act within a community to try and say, hey, here's what's been done. Look at these amazing things that have been done that we haven't even had a chance to reckon with their significance. Because especially in the world of poetry, I feel so much happens so fast and in specific worlds, and to kind of zoom back and say, wait a minute, this is astonishing. This is special. What can we do to draw attention to these spaces? So that's somewhat my ars poetica in collaboration with Steve. If we talk about the nuts and bolts of what I'm doing on a regular basis, it's mostly Granary Books. We like to stay busy with all sorts of activities that I'll be telling y'all about in a bit. I'm now officially a co-owner of the press, which is a jaw-dropping, astonishing, happy thing. But other projects I've been working on recently that I would just love to share with y'all include, I see Maureen Owen here. Hi, Maureen. We did an oral history and a bibliography of her press telephone books, which to me is just the epitome of 1970s and onward poetry community, inclusiveness, telling the stories, making the books, getting the work done. So I'm so proud that that was recently published with the University at Buffalo's poetry collection, Among the Neighbors series, which is run by Edric Mesmer, who also informed on Jen's gorgeous cataloger poem, which I ran and got my copy so you can see. My screen might be backwards, but just how dope that is for those of us who catalog books. Then other projects include, I've been writing about poets' libraries and thinking a lot about poets and artists' archives and placing those at institutions. And I make books. Through Granary Books, I assist with the design and the project management of our publications, and I do a little handmade series called TKS Books that publishes Messy Archivist and other kind of experimental things like Robin Blazer and David Farwell's cookbook, stuff that really kind of comes up through my direct encounters with archives, where you're going through boxes and say, wow, there's no way I can convey everything, but I can gesture towards those smaller special moments that speak to a poet's wider relationships or participation. So those are some of the things and themes that drive my work, and just so glad to continue the conversation.
Thank you very much. Again, what range? And we'll go on to more range. Jen, if you would tell us about all, I know you can't tell us about all your projects in 4 or 5 minutes, but we'd love to hear what you can tell us.
My first answer is I don't know. And I like to keep that in the front of my consciousness as much as I can, because what I love to do is ask questions, and I love to be kind of in the portal of the questions of a project or of a number of projects or the making of those things. I like to be in them. I don't like to be outside of them. So I always find that question a little like, yeah, like if you ask me honestly, I don't know. I know, but I don't know. I don't want to put it to words because it sort of squishes it. But for the last 20 some years, I've been both a visual artist and a poet, and the artist book form has been such a delight to me because of the joys of working in community and working like sort of the opposite of into the drawer, but into the library. So when I first started making artist books with Steve, I didn't hear about those books till about 10 years after. And that was so soothing to me because art is sort of, you know, the opposite. And it really suited me. The sort of the part of me that is a big part of me that loves to be in libraries and loves to be like deep in it. It's just special to me that the work goes back into that context where it is both shared in exhibitions, but held, like literally held. So one thing that makes me really happy about the new book is that the cataloger has to decide how to catalog it. You know, they're presented with this really long poem, which is definitely a cataloger love poem to them, but a critique of cataloging language. And so like, I feel like the book gets finished when it gets its place in the archive, and every archive catalogs differently. So that came out of conversations with Nancy Kuhl at Yale for the project we did. So that's sort of like, I don't know, I love geeking out about books, libraries, paper, and I'm actually zooming in from American Antiquarian Society, where I've been researching the embossments on Emily Dickinson's manuscripts as a kind of a portal to ask a lot of deeper questions about their material histories, their relationships to the mills, to the rag trade, to enslavement, expropriation, native rivers, salmon, beavers, etc. So they go way in there, but the first sort of concrete step in doing that is to be able to see them, which is often a big part of my work. So actually getting images of embossments is not a given. They sort of go missing in the archive images of photographed work. So I'm collaborating with a conservator at Harvard, Deborah Mayer, who is doing these just extraordinary, like close fiber looks at these embossments from Raking Light. And because she makes it possible to see them, it makes it possible to research them and draw those connections out. And that scholarship hasn't been done. So that's sort of my first step right now. But in my day job, I sew rivers and that kind of thing. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for just giving us a glimpse of your amazing range. And now we're going to segue and hear about Granary Books specifically. So MC, I know you've got a lot of images and a lot to tell us about the press and its various stages. So thanks.
There's too much to cover, Cole.
Not a doubt.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited to talk a little bit about it. And especially with Jen and Cecilia here, because for reasons that I'll get into, to me, they embody so much of the potential spirit of Granary Books as a project. And the amazing person that you're seeing painted by Johanna Drucker here is Steve Clay. Steve, I can't quite see you on my screen, but I know you're here. Hi and big hug. So the story of Granary Books, as I am going to tell it in the next 5 to 7 minutes of all of our lives, is going to be completely inadequate to the project itself. So bear with me on that, because it's 40 years of work. It's over 200 publications, most of which are books, and most of which don't have a single author, but are rather a pairing between a poet and an artist, a collaboration between a printer and a binder. So it's impossible to really kind of convey the surface here. But I can point the finger to Steve, who has been the visionary behind this project, Granary Books being the large umbrella. So round of applause for you, Steve. You frickin' rock. And Eleanor, if you'll go to the next slide. Steve Clay had to come from somewhere, certainly. And I won't get into the nitty gritty roots of where. It was Iowa, in part, but this is a nice picture by Norma Cole of Steve with what he loves best, which are books. So next slide, if you will. You'll see a picture of an early Granary publication, 1986. This is a Jack Spicer quotation, lovingly printed by the Beeler Press. And it's me also keenly standing outside of a building that once housed Origin Books. So in the mid-'80s, Steve and Merce Dostal had a shop that primarily focused on poetry. Steve had been at Naropa, I believe not as a registered student, but as a participant, a participating witness in poetry workshops by Allen Ginsberg and W.S. Burroughs, and wanted to start a bookstore. So Origin became, Origin, of course, after Sid Corman's Origin magazine, Origin became a site for that experimentation. And at that time, Steve met Jim Sitter, who had Bookslinger in Minneapolis. Minneapolis is where we're situated right now, also Minneapolis. And Jim and Bookslinger had a particular shelf of fine press titles that they were distributor of. And that distributor's name was Granary Books Incorporated. So Steve is not, in fact, the founder of Granary Books, but he sure took that ball and ran with it. And he ran with it to New York City in the late 1980s. And all through the 90s, he had a gallery on Broadway and started meeting some of the people whose work he would publish. He already knew so many printers and binders, these folks that he'd met by being a fine press book distributor. But the poets and the artists really kind of came in that New York City context. So if you'll go to the next slide, Eleanor. Johanna Drucker has been a longtime collaborator of Granary. And her Century of Artist books was the first trade publication by the press, because all these fantastic conversations were happening about the various strains of artist books and book as book. And there wasn't yet a space to truly chart out that conversation. And still, some folks might say that conversation is really emerging. So Johanna, through Granary, states artist books take every possible form. Oh, good. This could really truly be any type of practice. And that's what I find so generative about these types of collaborations that Granary has facilitated over the years. So Eleanor, I'm going to invite you to kind of freestyle, give each image like 5 or so seconds. I'm going to give you a tour of some Granary projects while being completely unable to speak to each of their particulars. Jane Wodening, or Brackage, was one of the first women, first people that the press published. This is a recent publication of hers. You'll see in subsequent images, Cecilia working on her incredible Kipu, books that challenged the form of what a book can be. You'll see Jen smiling in her studio with Becca, her wonderful assistant and associate, putting the finishing touches on Concordance Emission. You'll see the books that they made. And Buzz Spector, you'll see in the next slide. Buzz, I think you're in the audience, so I'm really glad I put this slide in for you. Really experimental, fantastic work that thinks of the bookishness of an object. A passage here from 1994 had each page hand ripped out so you can see the rippling surface. Surface and depth, Buzz, you were saying in the comments that a book has depth on a shelf. You'll see a Geniza by Raphael Rubinstein. You'll see a spread by Yvonne Jacquette, who is paired with Maureen Owen. Ted Berrigan, George Schneemann, the list goes on, and I've missed so many people, but still continuing to publish artist books these days too. And right now, we'll linger on the slide a little bit, Eleanor, because I want to give a shout out to Julie Harrison, who has long been part of the Granary family. The Granary Books loft she homesteaded in the 70s as part of her artistic practice. And here she is paired with Louis Warsh, who is another key member of the Granary family. He was the first archive that Steve placed. And you'll see Joe Brainerd's I Remember Too on this slide, kind of pointing to another area of practice for Granary, which is the publication of trade books with texts that just aren't available, that weren't available at the time, but everyone reads I Remember now, seemingly. It was featured on a TV show recently, and it started as an angel hair book, a small offset distributed through St. Mark's Poetry Project book. So it's that attentiveness, the participating witness aspect. Then to go to the next slide, another really key feature of Granary's work over the years has been collaboration with special collections. And Jen, you mentioned this too, that direct collaboration of placing your material at an institution and having it be cataloged and part of their collection is truly the completion of a sort of artistic statement about what this material is and then what it can be, because the idea is, of course, that institutions collect for a future. So you see Mark Diminution here at the Colorado Antiquarian Book Seminar last year. And he's got some Granary titles behind him. We feel so fortunate for our curatorial counterparts that have allowed us to do all sorts of interesting bookmaking. And then the next picture too is my opportunity to give a shout out to so many of the printers and binders, folks that we've worked with over the years. You'll see Jason Walls expertly cutting a Basil King art print here. And he with Judith Ivory at Uncommon Bindery have been really powerful collaborators for us lately. But we go way back with Phil Gallo, who does the Hermetic Press, and Daniel Kelm, his amazing wire edge bindings. So I've sketched out a rather large ecosystem, and just to kind of loop it back to a certain core, something that Granary really participates in too is the placement of poets' archives and artist archives too. And for me, what this does is it creates this whole ecosystem of practice in which the poetry, the bookmaking, none of that is really separate from the true question of what does it take to be a human in space and time? Where is our community? Where are our collaborators? And what is the raw stuff of what it is that we do? So if you go to our next and final slide, Eleanor, you'll see Anne Waldman's hands lovingly going through Ed Bose's notebooks from the 70s. And the archival aspect, I think, really kind of rounds out these different realms of practice that Granary has participated in and created over the years. The artist books, the trade books that really give attention to the book as book, and the primary sources, the rare book collections, that raw material stuff that tells us who we are on the slippery slope in space and time. So with that, I'll pause the brief history lesson and maybe also direct you all to Kyle Schlesinger's wonderful interview with Steve Clay in his recent book, The Poetics of the Press, which has some other incredible contributors as well to kind of situate what Granary has done and where it will be. So thank you.
Thank you. That was splendid. Really, you covered those 40 years amazingly well and really gave us the sense. So thank you for that. And we have another, say, 15 minutes where we can kind of just openly converse among ourselves before we then invite the entire audience to come into the conversation as well. And so I know that perhaps you have questions to ask each other. A couple things that I was really thinking about in looking over your materials past couple weeks and hearing you today, the importance of collaboration and the range. We think of collaboration as two people working together. But I know that in all of your practices, it gets much more complicated. It can be teamwork. It can be collaborating with different materials, with different time zones, with different media. So I'd love to hear, what you all think about in terms of collaboration. And the other thing is simply this issue of materiality. From Jen, your interest in silk and cloth from way back, and Cecilia with all the weaving and knotting and things that go into the very material quality of the quipu, and MC with your bookmaking. How does material come into your practice? And I'll just invite anybody to leap in and address either of those. So I'm just going to leap in and ask Jen to address something.
The thing that strikes me about your question is that I feel always drawn to material intelligence. It holds within itself so much, physically, structurally, historically. It's made of so many things. You know, I'm just thinking a lot about paper, which is made of water and sun and fiber. And the fiber, when you get into it, is made of helixes, and that you know can be tested against warmth. And there's just so many layers of history in material, and so many layers of how that holds human movement, animal movement, earth movement. I find it endlessly rich and humbling to dive into. So it was really for me, it was silk poems that after spending 7 years in international research and looking into liquefied silk and the history of it, it made me look back at Dickinson's paper in a totally different way. Like, how could I not have asked where that came from? Why do we think paper is blank? Why do we think it isn't? It's a plant. Sometimes with a little sheen of, you know, of animal on it to make the pens ink sit right. And so, and it has huge implications for how people live and what happens to our earth home.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good. Can I not
We'll pass it on.
pass the needle to Cecilia?
And I'm also thinking, you know, this idea of collaborating with materials, because materials are living things.
Yeah.
And so we'll pass it on to Cecilia and see where you want to take it.
Well, you just expressed, Jen, why is it that your work is so incredibly fertile for anybody who comes across your work? Because there is an untold depth of possibilities that you have always included in each one of your projects. It's enough sometimes just the page, just the note to set these all kinds of reverberations and resonances emerge. So you are collaborating as well with all your readers, you know, because your readers find you to be a collaborator with the cosmos, with the universe, and with every material that you work. So I really loved what you said. And it really puts me in the space to speak. Again, I always begin with childhood, with the little girl that I was. Who knows if I was really her, but in any case, that's a nice way to begin. And I believe that all my precarious work began as a collaboration with the forces. And I have said this in so many ways, in so many forms. And I believe that since I began saying that and doing that, which was more than, this was in 1966, so it's a long time ago, now people are speaking and sensing that this may actually be completely true. And for the longest time, I could see that people didn't feel that this could possibly be true, that I had to be making it up. And so I am delighted to say that in that moment, when I am a little girl in the cold wind of a beach in the South Pacific, where I was, this is in Concon, Chile, I suddenly became aware that the wind was aware, that the sea, the light, the sun, everything was aware. And I dissolved in that moment. And in that moment of complete dissolution and complete reverence for that awareness that made me aware too, that's when my art began. And everything that I have been doing is connected to that instant of deep collaboration. And what kind of collaboration is that? For example, I can say practical, concrete things like I picked up a piece of debris and I planted it in the sand for the sea to erase. So for me, the work was completed by the erasure. But is it erasure? What is it that the sea was doing? The sea was getting back something that the sea itself had thrown in the beach. So in that circular reciprocal motion is the teaching. And this is the ancient view of both Taoists in ancient China, the ancient Americans, and I haven't researched with that depth, enough depth, South African ancient cultures, but everything that I have encountered from the South African earliest humans, so-called, expresses that this is the ancient view, which now echoes what is happening with quantum physics, with the notion that information is really in the entanglement, is really in the reciprocal exchange. And so I think it is a miracle that all of us, poets and artists, have maintained alive for all these millions of years that we have been human or proto-human. And it is high time for us to remember that this is so incredibly fragile, because this understanding that we embody artists and poets in the world now is really being persecuted. And so the awareness wants us to be aware of its infinite potential. And it is this awareness that is the true content of art and poetry, the acknowledgement of this interaction between us and knowledge, between us and sensation and perception and hearing, listening, touching. That's why I love what you said about the intelligence of the materials. It's not a metaphor. It is actually completely true and evident for anyone that comes across with an open, not just mind, with an open body, with an open heart, with an open, what else can we open in order to leap forward to a different kind of behavior in this land, with each other, with ourselves, and with time and space.
Right. Thank you. And MC, do you want to tell us about your thoughts on collaboration and or materiality and how they might go together? And
I think Jen and Cecilia are the perfect people to have responded to this. I'm so blown away by both of their comments, in large part because it's the everything, that collaboration and materiality and collaboration with materials, it encompasses the whole cosmological scope of a poetics, because it's really what it boils down to people and the material circumstances of our lives, which of course have enormous implications beyond that, but simple, not easy, but simple. And I find myself particularly interested in their responses because, thinking of Granary Books as a project, sometimes Granary Books facilitates the production of works, but for Cecilia and for Jen, they fully take the realm of initiating their projects into material being. So I visited Jen when she was making Concordance Omission and trying to align the printer heads just so to print it. And I recently had a conversation with Cecilia about what precise ink she used to stamp the letters on her quipu for Granary, what were the chemical contents of that marker for conservation purposes. So I think one of the great joys of my work is being attentive to the why of the materiality, with the choices that poets have made and the choices that publishers have made. And one of the books that we did this year was with Emily McVarish, who is a fantastic letterpress printer and book designer. And I have it here, caption. And one of the things that I loved about this book, you won't really be able to see it on my Zoom screen, but she uses silver ink frequently throughout the book. And that operates on multiple levels. I love shiny things, and I'm not even joking. Anyone who has seen my book making knows there's always something holographic on it. But B, It's actually quite difficult to print very well with silver ink because of the chemical qualities of it. It gets extraordinarily messy very quickly. And of course, Emily's work is the farthest cry from messy that you could possibly get, but just to know that. So every artist and poet we work with invites me to further investigate why specific choices were made, because there are very few accidents in this type of thinking. And I wore red today. I wore a red woven fabric to honor Cecilia and Jen for the way that color and weaving integrates itself in their work. And I actually was hoping, if we're talking about materials, can I ask you both to comment a bit on the role that weaving as a notion or a practice plays in both of your poetics?
Yeah, great question.
Jen, you should begin and I pick it up. Or would you rather have it the other way around? You want? Okay. So I will tell a story instead of really answering, but maybe the story will. There was a moment when I think it was Kendra Pites, I don't know if I'm correctly, she organized a wonderful exhibition, and both Jen and I were part of this exhibition. I think this was the year that Trump was elected. And what year was that? 2016, was it? And so I remember I was there and going to perform. I performed actually on the day that he was elected. So that's how I can remember that exact location. But I arrive in the exhibition and I encounter Jen's work, where she is honoring the notations by Emily Dickinson. And this is a white piece of cloth with red embroidery. Do you remember that, Jen? And I was so deeply touched by that I did my performance based on the fact that in Andean view of weaving, a weaving that is conceived as an offering to transform realities is done by uniting a red and a white thread. And why? Is because the white represents the male side of the force, meaning semen and the waves of the sea. And the red represents the female side of the force, being menstrual blood, from which future life will be possible. And so I did a performance based on that. And so the weaving as materiality and physical structure has involved us as humans for as long as we know, many thousands of years. But I think now, with the threat to humanity's survival or survivance, like some authors say, the notion that there is another kind of weaving which has involved indigenous cultures around the world forever, is the weaving of us to life itself, to life and death. So it is a kind of metaphysical weaving. And this metaphysical weaving has been what has concerned me and allowed me to do the quipus that I do, and allows me to understand Jen's work and the work of all the people who work not with weaving per se, as we have known it traditionally, but the weaving in another dimensions. And this is the weaving that is not that I don't like the actual weaving, I do, but the actual weaving rests or finds its force in the other weaving, the weaving that is utterly invisible and yet transforms everything.
Well, thank you for that. That's so well put. And if we could hear from you, Jen, on this, and then we'll go into some Q&A and allow the audience, because I know there's lots of questions. So, but we'd love to hear your take on this, Jen.
Cecilia, I think that your books have been with me from the start. And I always think of your weavings as like roots roots of language, roots of words. I'm thinking of early books like CloudNet, not that early, probably like mid-career for you, but it was so nourishing to me to know that your practice was moving and thinking in the world. And so there are many kinds of weaving that happen, and I feel very interwoven with many of you. I look out and I see your faces and I want to squish you. The thing about weaving I found so humbling is that I couldn't understand it without studying it. You know, like I love reading about things, but there's a certain point where the loom has to be a loom, and you have to actually thread it and set it up. It takes a long time, and it's mathematical, it's meticulous, it's a lot to get organized in order to just pass a shuttle through it. And I love things that exceed my ability to understand them, that make me work harder. And weaving has always been one of those things. And I don't understand it in the way a really serious weaver would, because there's so much depth to the art form. But the history of textiles, the structure of textiles, the material intelligence of textiles always moves me. And for me, there's a very thin line between text and textiles. They're usually one and the same thing pretty quickly. Paper is a good example of that. I think the red thread was there. It's the longest wavelength that the eye can see. And the quilts that I was sewing with the variant markings were intended to restore an omitted system. So I wanted to kind of push them back into the visual haptic plane, to be felt, to be seen, to be present, and in their sort of composite form with 16 or 22 poems, markings present, to be recognized, to suddenly be something that once seen you couldn't unsee when you look back at the manuscript pages. And that paradigm is really important to me, and it's important to me in other people's work too, like the sort of half fingerprint size poems in Bob Brown's book Words. In the poem, what he did in that moment, this tiny thing that even when you're looking for it, you miss. That I just find that so rich and powerful, that something can evade someone who's looking closely. It's like mushroom, you know, like the people who look for the tiny mushrooms, they call it mushroom eyes. And you have to really train that attention before you can see them. That's a long-winded answer.
It was a wonderfully winded answer. That's just what we want, is the elaborations. That's where all the great details come up. So thank you. Thank you all for your great contributions, great conversation. And I know there are questions from the audience. Thank you, all of you, for coming. And we look forward to your questions and interventions. So I'll turn it over to Eleanor on that score.
Thank you, Cole. And thank you so much, MC and Jen and Cecilia, for your incredibly generous and beautiful insights. I wish we could keep going for forever, but we do have some great questions from the audience today. Our first question will be from Rebecca, and you should be able to unmute.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much for putting on this program. It's been wonderful, and I look forward to reflecting on the recording also. Just there's so many things. I just wanted to ask if anyone had advice for emerging artists who self-publish or self-produce their books, but maybe hope to collaborate with an artist book publisher in the future. Thank you.
I can share a little bit since I find myself in being a publisher, which I might suggest tends to be an accident for many people in publishing and a somewhat happy, though very complicated byproduct of community. So my suggestion would be to really think about who your interlocutors are, your collaborators, your community, your own poetics, but also who you find yourself in correspondence with, and to think too about the audience of your works and find yourself really developing a strong curiosity about that. Because especially in artist books, there are so many different approaches. There's the democratic multiple, there's deluxe editions, there's all sorts of interventions, private collectors, zine fairs, special collections, and knowing who you want to hang around with, I think, is one of the most powerful things, because that's kind of your political statement in a way too. And that lets you know more about the people that will eventually have your books in their hands and just be blown away by the thing it is that you do.
I'd also say that that skill mapping or skill sharing is a really powerful way to go about it too. So maybe if you know how to do something that someone else doesn't know how to do, you form a collaborative and you put it together. But I love the book Secret Location on the Lower East Side that Steve and Rodney Phillips did. I always taught that when I was talking about publishing and creating what you need to exist in the world, as a really beautiful model. And I think for me as a maker also, I love to make things to see what I'm thinking. And so you don't necessarily have to collaborate with someone straight away when you're thinking through an idea. Just making it is very instructive for how you'll make it again, or how you'll make it when you have to make 50. And it's just a fun way to think. You know, different people think differently. I need to think, I can only get so far in one way before I can, you know, it all has to kind of move at a pace with each other. I don't think everybody's like that, but there's something really important about saying, I want it to be this size and I want it to feel this way. And I want it to open easily, or I want you to have to open the pages like that. They won't be cut. They'll be this, you know, this whole shape. You know, like there are things that books can do, and that you can do with books in community of people who know how to do stuff with books. I mean, it's just endless. And it's a great space of collaboration. It's a great space of possibility. And I feel like models like Granary are really, really special, and I hope will be taken up in lots of communities to see what's possible. So I want to see what you make. Make it.
We have another question, and if anyone else would like to ask a question, please don't hesitate to raise your hand or send a message in the chat. Our next question right now is going to be from Selby, and you should be able to unmute Selby to ask.
Yeah, hi. So I read a lot of poetry and I end up buying it online from small presses. I live in the Bay Area, so I'm wondering if you guys know of any like great in-person either libraries or bookstores where I can see it and buy it, because I don't know, I feel like online's great because there's access to everything, but it's not always the most satisfying way of encountering poetry.
So what kind of books are you looking for, Selby?
I mean, I like Granary Books, but like, you know, like art books, poetry books, like more independent things. Like some bookstores in the Bay Area will have like poetry from local poets, but it's not actually that common. I know you guys are in New York, right? So do you guys know of any like in-person places?
I might invite everyone to drop their fave stories in the chat for that. I think especially when it comes to bookstores, there's a lot of work to be done in tracing the unique histories of bookstores. Like, I'm very interested in the historical conversation of legendary bookshops. I'm not sure I have recommendations off the top of my head, but I'm going to crowdsource this.
Also, one approach is to go to your local bookshops and say, please carry more small press poetry, please carry more artist books, and really urge both large kind of corporate style and small to just feature it.
Amazing. I will definitely do that.
Thank you so much, Selby. And it looks like a lot of people are sending some recommendations in the chat. I see a lot of city lights. So it seems like some cool places are coming in. If anyone else wants to ask a question, let me know. And I would like to ask a question to you all. Just from this conversation, you are all clearly such natural teachers and mentors. And I think that working with books is very tied to education, of course. And I saw somebody mention that in the chat just now as well. But I'm wondering if you all or some of you could speak to your practice's relationship to education, and also, if you want, your maybe your experience with education, how formal or informal education helps shape your practice, or how it is a part of your life. And education very broadly. I don't just mean like a school, but you could also talk about that.
Let's hear from maybe Cecilia, because I feel your voice hasn't been in the room for a moment or two.
Thank you. Yeah, when I'm asked about what education I received, I immediately think of my grandparents. My grandfather was a thinker, writer, a lawyer defending civil rights, and he was in prison 4 times. And I remember when I was a little girl, all that was behind him. But every Sunday, my grandparents created what is called in Latin cenaculo, which means a place for conversation and discussion that began at 10 a.m. and ended up like at 9 p.m. every Sunday, all of my life. And incredible philosophers, writers, politicians, artists came to those gatherings, and we kids were not allowed. But some of us, me, for example, we crawled back into the room to hear that. And this was live debates on political, philosophical, art issues on an ongoing basis every Sunday. And for a child to hear that collective intelligence at work, that was my true education. So hearing these people, not only what they said, but the fierceness of the way in which they defended their views, and at the same time, the gentleness and the kindness. I remember that after these incredible discussions where you would think these people would never talk to each other, at the end, they embrace each other and get ready for next session. So that was the double teaching, the fact that your difference needs to stand out, and at the same time, your love for those that oppose you. That, I think, was my true education.
Wonderful. Thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in on that one?
I will.
Great,
So
thanks.
I did a lot of formal education, but the real education has been people like Cecilia, people like Jen, collaborators like you, Cole, Eleanor, everyone, and especially the folks I've kind of met along the way, Amiel Alkali when I was a graduate student, and now especially Steve Clay. The biggest teacher is conversation, and I'm young. I find myself always in the role of the student, and I hope I always will be, because it's a powerful and special position to occupy, to be in conversation with people like Steve and Jen and Cecilia and all y'all. So the education has come most powerfully from relationships.
Thank you. That's maybe a great note to segue into the closing reading by Cecilia. But again, I just want to thank all of you so much for bringing your thoughts, your responses, your ideas together with us today. It's been really, really rich. Really appreciate it.
Just before we go to Cecilia's reading, I just want to pass the mic over to Fong, our publisher and artistic director, to finish up the Q&A.
Well, thank you, Eleanor. Cecilia, Ismail Randowitz, say hello. I spoke to him just now.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I remember listening to a terrific interview with my friend Charles Ruiz and Susan Howe, talking about how James Lapland, who came to Paris and stayed with Alex B. Toklas and Gertrude Stein, and then making his way to meet Ezra Pound. And it must have been a few years before New Direction was created. So I think it was Ezra Pound who said to Lapland that you're not going to be any good as a poet. Why don't you take up something useful? So my question is very simple. We need more people who are so honest with certain other people and put them to use in other ways. So I don't know whether this question is really go directly to Steve or all of you, but I think it's a very good thing to do sometime, rather than encourage people on. And I don't know. It's a very morally complex question, but maybe I just rephrase it. Don't bother, can think about it. But if next live I come back, I would like to have Cecilia's voice. That would be for me. So that's it. Go back to you, Eleanor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fong. And just again, a huge thanks to Cole and Jen and MC and Cecilia. It's been so terrific today. To close us out, we're so lucky to have the privilege to hear Cecilia give us a reading. So the floor is all yours, Cecilia.
Thank you, Eleanor. And to honor Granary, that allowed me to do something that nobody else in the world would think of allowing me to. And so I created this Chankani Kipu. So I will read you because the book is as you could see, just threads. But I think this was probably Steve's suggestion. We also included a little sort of notebook for people who wanted to read more about it. So I will read you from this little notebook that is hidden in the box. And it's called the Chankani Kipu Instruction Manual. And it says, Chankani Kipu. Chankani to begin to dwell in the unformed and old, to in shankan breath imprints the unspun floating as a shadow or unstable on the outer layers of a reef. Unspun stands for what is not yet potential deformed. Us life force at work, the life force at work. And then I'll show you the last page of that little notebook. And there is the poem that I imprinted as MC was saying on the wall, unstable little marks, and what these words that are floating on the outer hairs of the wall say the following words. First, in the translation that Jerry Rothenberg did, it says this: Shankani Kipu, I speak to you, my thread, bridge of breath, unspun wool. Begin now, spin a threshold, a speech of light. And then in the wool itself, I imprinted it, but in Spanish, which is not really Spanish, but a border state of Spanish in which it comes closer to Quechua. And it says, Atite lo mi puente de aliento mío, sin par. Chanco,
Cecilia, thank you. That was so beautiful. I feel so lucky to have heard your reading and also to have heard the readings of MC and Jen. Thank you all so much, so much for being here today. I'm so grateful. We would also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program. They help make these daily conversations possible and support our growing archive, which you can check out on our YouTube channel. And this conversation will be up there to turn back to soon. For the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has been a platform for the arts, culture, and politics in our free monthly publications and our public events like this daily NSE. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support the Rail and support our work. And join us tomorrow for a conversation with Janine Gutierrez and Amanda Glubizi on the event of Gego Measuring Infinity at the Guggenheim. We will close with a reading by Laura Carmen Hidalgo. Thanks everyone for tuning in today, and you can now all turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for your questions. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you all
Thank
so
you
much.
so much.
Thank you.
That was
Bye.
absolutely brilliant.
So much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
So wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Cole.
everybody.
So inspiring. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Great to
Congratulations.
be in the middle
Yay.
of 4 conversations and 400
you.
reveries.
And it's great to see you, Buzz. Really wonderful. So glad to see you here.
Special. Thank you.
So many great bookmakers came. It's
Oh
amazing.
my gosh, yeah.